Hello, it's BT. Got another argument cooked up. This one is actually an original one that I wrote, and I feel like it's pretty creative, something that not really many folks have really thought of before when it comes to thinking about other animals and creatures of the earth. But it's the ape argument, which I rated a 6 out of 10. Um, Kind of inspired from an anthropology class I took in college. So essentially, I start off by saying that gorillas, they're basically like human like creatures that have behavior relative to like grieving for the dead, questioning the concept of death, and they basically have their own like role driven societies that are quite complex that humans can't really understand. Come to think of it, something to add to this first premise here is that I saw a video too recently about a tiger grieving for its dead companion. So it's something that's common, I think, in animals in general with higher level consciousness. But in any case, moving on, any creature that can question death, grieve for the dead, or maintain society is highly complex and intelligently and consciously thinking. So anything that is highly intelligent and consciously thinking is dignified, meaning it should have a degree of free will. I guess what I'm trying to say is no matter what a human does, no matter how evil they are, every one person has inherent dignity just because we're alive and we're able to do what we want. And infringing upon that is horrible in any case, no matter how evil the individual is or if they do it to others. So yeah, dignity correlates very highly with free will. Um, However, currently, most of the living gorillas alive today are stuck within zoos to ensure their survival because they're dying out in the wild. And with the amount that we have changed to their typical way of life, um, it's not really the same as it was for them probably back millions or hundreds of thousands of years ago. And basically, gorillas being stuck in zoos and not really being able to do what they want is an infringement on their free will and conscious thinking, even though this way of life ensures their survival. So, in some cases, it's a really important thing for being like animal conservation and species conservation. But in the case where it infringes upon free will, I think it's important to take a closer look and to think twice about what you're actually doing to these creatures. And in addition, gorillas are nonviolent, chill creatures that don't attack humans without persistent invasion of their privacy or pestering. I know something I recall learning is that a way to show respect to a gorilla is to basically not look at them, but like to be by them, but basically avoid eye contact. And that just shows kind of like it's like a mutual thing with a gorilla. Who knows why, but they like that. Um, so basically, therefore, the final conclusion with this is that to ensure the survival of the species and to properly respect their complexity, dignity, and free will, they should be freed and actively monitored in like a bigger livable area that simulates their environment a lot more. Um, I don't know how it would work with like a national park or something in the US or like a really like big enclosed area, but essentially something like that that kind of like mimics what they're used to seeing that ends up being a lot bigger than like a zoo enclosure. That is something that would like guarantee like that their dignity is upheld. Um Gorillas, this statement here is kind of I was kind of thinking of Planet of the Apes, not gonna lie, when I wrote it. But they basically would never likely be able to change their behavior to the point of like being adaptable alongside humans or like living alongside us, but just kind of like finding their own spots to be. But a change in the way they're currently treated would uphold their dignity. And as of now, the treatment of them is almost kind of like, I would say their mental capacities relate to like a 3-year-old toddler, basically. Probably even, maybe even higher than that. Um, but basically, it's almost like we're holding them in cells against their wills, and it can be psychologically damaging, especially if they're in one place for a long time. Like if they're transported to a zoo and they're like in the cage of a back of a truck or something, like that would stress them out. They don't think that far from how we do. So I just imagine, like, I don't know, if there's ever a point where like humans would be seen as like a lower level animal or something and put in a zoo, like how would that make you feel? And honestly, I think for gorillas, it's not that much different. Um, so this is overall a difficult topic to address and highlight in a society that's rightfully suited for human prosperity, but the current way that they and other zoo animals in general are treated is disrespectful to them. Lastly, one gorilla can definitely not take out 100 unarmed humans. They definitely can't do that. So that's the extent of the argument there. I rate it a 6 out of 10 because I think there are some very true things to it, but implementing it in our society with how modern it is would be pretty hard to do. So this is definitely one of the more like out there arguments I have, kind of inspired by a few different things. But basically the core idea is that all creatures that exist are conscious in some way. Every creature, down to the smallest microscopic thing, has the ability to act in a way different from each situation. If you are like seeing a bacteria under a microscope and basically see it like inhale something, if you rewind time and replay that moment and run it again and again and again, that bacteria won't do the same thing every time. It'll find a different way to do it. It might like lose interest and go a different way. It might have a mutation pop up in its DNA that makes it just combust. There's different things that happen on such a tiny level that makes almost everything have free will, from the smallest thing to the biggest creature out there. Um, so even no matter how instinctual it is, like most creatures on Earth rely on instinct and are pretty automatic. But basically, that like there's always like a scale of freedom, and that increases with bigger brains. Um, basically, like it's always the building blocks of everything has always been either neurons or DNA. Those are like the raw components, and even though DNA makes neurons, neurons make a brain. So DNA, I feel like that's almost kind of like a bit of a lower level brain in a way. It's more instructions, like unpredictable instructions, whereas neurons are kind of like where you really get the ability to just like think what you want and imagine. So it's a pretty it's pretty cool to think about. Um yeah, I know so I already kind of covered most of the bases with this argument, but something additional like that I'm just seeing with my own pet, my dog, Lou. Lou, I can tell that I mean, he's had like anxiety a lot. Most of the time, like when I leave the house, he goes crazy. When anyone leaves the house, he goes crazy. When we come in the house, he goes crazy. But there's times I notice too where like nothing will be going on, and he'll just start licking the floor nonstop. Like there's no food on the floor or anything, but he just starts like licking every surface on the ground. And it's like, why would my dog be doing that? And thinking about it, he it's almost like when something becomes like a little bit like too domesticated, like creatures' instincts kind of start doing weird things. Like it, I would say not necessarily kicks in the overdrive, but has them act out in ways that aren't really true to the animal. Um, Thinking about a time I visited a zoo, I remember it was a rainy day. I think it was in Canada. But basically, I remember seeing a cow in the enclosure or a bull, and it was just laying in the corner, and there's no other animals in it. And the grass looked pretty bad. It was a muddy day, rainy, kind of chilly, and it was just sitting there, laying, staring off. And it's like cows don't really do too much, but it's like I feel like if you're not in the wild and have an instinctual drive when you're like a lower level creature in terms of mental complexity, um like the animals just start to get like depressed, like because they can't really like think super deeply. So I feel like there's so many points where like dogs and like cows, pigs, and like factory farms are just have to are just like driven insane and develop like issues and have to go through like their version of like hell. And like it's really, I don't know. I'm really glad it's not something I have to see or think about every day, because it's quite sad how a lot of the creatures today are treated and what they have to deal with because of us. Um, but you know, that's in order for this way of life to remain sustainable. It's how it's got to be, right? Probably. So, in general, I have like a ton of respect for pet owners who put so much time and effort into like loving their creatures and training them to do awesome things, because that is what fuels their spirit, and I think helps them live for longer and just have more connection. Some things that kind of like play until they're huh, I don't know. They kind of like act with their instinct. It allows the animal to be what they're supposed to be, while also honestly in some ways like increasing their own level of consciousness because they see what humans are able to do for them. I think it's a really powerful idea. But yeah, with gorillas, their brains and just the way they walk and just how they look in groups. Like in my anthropology class, it literally made apes like my favorite animal of any animal because of how just cool they are. There's it's I don't know, they're quite special, and I feel like it's important to respect our ancient ancestors who we basically have far overtaken now. The issues of modern day life kind of persist into the animals we care for. I mean, a lot of why I struggle sometimes to do enough with my dog is because I work a lot and I have things I like to do, and it's just hard sometimes to always have time for them. And I do make time for them. I'm not acting like I'm a horrible pet owner because I love animals. I take my dog on walks. I take him on more walks if it wasn't so cold. Maybe even include him in one of these if it wasn't so freezing outside. That's why I'm in my car. Um, so yeah. Spectral creatures. I want to touch on one more thing. Basically, when I brought up ensuring survival versus kind of like letting the creatures go and live on their own, um, I think it's like, especially depending on the age of the creature, and you could probably go up to humans with this too, but it would start to get a little controversial. But a lot of times, ensuring survival isn't as good as letting it go and being yourself for the rest of the time you have as yourself. A life lived in suffering isn't really a life at all, I think, especially for these creatures um, who rely on a strong component of instinct to like power their being. And when their instinct like isn't needed or met with unnatural circumstances, these creatures visibly get lonely, depressed, angry, and they're literally unable to do what they want because they can't think of how to do it a different way. It's quite it's quite a sad thing if you think about it a lot, which that's why part of me is like a little bit glad that like I don't it's not something I get to see because it would make me kind of make it hard to just be like, wow, this is how life is. This is how our world is. But humans are still the most important and always are and have the ability to help beyond the situation. So there's still ways where you can get around some of the systemic practices to help animals and save them from otherwise circumstances where they would die really early. So there's a lot of good we can still do. Climate change is almost like climate change, I feel like, and what's going on in the oceans is like this argument, but on a world scale where the impact of CO2 in the air, greenhouse gases, all that stuff is just affecting the oceans and making life not so good for in certain areas for fish and complex ocean creatures like dolphins or whales. Um, Climate change, I will of course talk about that later. I would say this is probably the last argument. Or well, this is only the second argument, but from here on out, it'll probably get a little bit less tame, where I'll start to talk more about belief and existence stuff. One more thing about my arguments in general, when you look at them in the description, they contain text that is bolded, and I bold the most important like takeaway lines in the arguments, whether they're in like different premises or in the final conclusion. So those are at least a way to kind of show like what the most important ideas are from them, the most necessary. So I guess you don't have to entirely read the whole thing if you want big takeaway ideas. Okay, that's all I got. This might be a little bit of a longer video. Yeah, the cold has made me really want to just stay in my car. But thank you for watching. Have a splendid day. Stay warm. Praise apes.